Hi, this is Sergeant Betsy Brander Smith with the National Police Association, and this is the National Police Association podcast. I have a guest today that I have known for literally decades, and he's a guy responsible um, for literally saving cops' lives, both with his own hand and as well with some concepts that he started talking about decades ago called tactical medicine for cops. We're going to talk all about that because he's got a new concept that I think is brilliant, and it needs to be talked about, not just in law enforcement circles, but it needs to be talked about to you, the public. Dr. Andrew Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, so you go through all this education and then you decide to not just be a physician, but you thought you'd get involved in law enforcement. Talk about how that happened.
It's a very long, convoluted story, but I'll start in Illinois when I started my residency in general surgery here in Chicago. During my fellowships, I went back to the police academy in Illinois. I got certified as a police officer, and largely because early in my residency, I had taken care of a police officer in Southern Illinois or Southern Cook County that had been shot and injured. Some of the officers that I was talking to learned my background in pre-hospital and public safety prior to becoming a physician. And they said, hey, would you be willing to come out and hang out with us and maybe train us a little bit and participate with us? I said, sure. In all my spare time of 100 hours plus per week as a surgical resident, I'll give it a shot. So that was the beginning of the conversations. And just to kind of speed forward a little bit, I ended up as part of the Northern Illinois Police Alarm System. I started my career in Illinois as a law enforcement officer in Des Plaines, moved to the Cook County Sheriff's Police Department, and then eventually to the Illinois State Police, where I am now.
Now, when I started in 1980, I'm super old, and we took a little course in the academy on first aid and it was about the same course that I took when I was in 4-H. So there wasn't much to it. And we didn't have tourniquets. We didn't have any of that stuff. In fact, we were told, do not, if you're shot or someone else is shot or badly injured, you, officer, are not qualified to use a tourniquet. You'll damage somebody. You'll do all these things. So we were kind of taught in the 80s, 70s and 80s, wait for the paramedics. And that didn't fare well for injured law enforcement officers, did it?
No, actually, it's really interesting. That's a really interesting history because you're right. Tourniquets, if we wanted to talk about tourniquets for 1 second, they had a very bad rap historically. We know in the Vietnam era, thousands of soldiers died from extremity hemorrhage that was 100% preventable. And over the years, the mythology of tourniquets really has changed largely because the data has changed. We've studied them. And with the conflicts that have ensued over the last 30 years, we've actually been able to acquire data and learn that they're not all bad, especially when transport times in the civilian sector are short. Tourniquets can absolutely save lives. Now, do most people require a tourniquet? They don't. Keep in mind, I'm a trauma surgeon. As a trauma surgeon, I'm really just a plumber, if you will. It's blood that keeps you alive. It's a liquid and it flows through pipes. And my job as a trauma surgeon is to fix the pipes because that's what's going to kill you. So this is near and dear to my heart. This is what I do every day. You're right. Most police officers are taught a first responder level training at the academy, if that. Some are taught a little bit more. Most don't keep up that certification. So yes, they may have had it, but most agencies around this country, they're lucky if they retain a small part of it. Also, remember, what's the first thing that I ever learned in EMT school when I was 16 years old was don't go anywhere until the police make the scene safe. So the cops are waiting for the medics are waiting for the cops to say it's okay, and ultimately someone is potentially dying. And that creates a very difficult situation for not only the victim, but for the rescuers as well.
That's such a great point because that's one of the things that we ran into. You waited, you didn't run into a fire if you were a cop, although cops end up doing that all the time. But you're right, we had to secure the scene and make things safe so that the EMTs or the paramedics could come and take control of that patient. And then, of course, sometimes we're the patient as well, the police officer. And that's something that you brought, to first and foremost to my native Illinois was that concept of tactical medicine, that concept of police officers being able to engage in buddy aid so I can help my injured fellow officer, or even self aid. Talk about the evolution of that.
So now you really made me feel old just for the moment. Um, that was in 2007 that I had some early conversations as part of the Illinois Tactical Officers Association with some of the leadership there. And we came across the problem that we realized that not only were police officers not trained to help others, but we really weren't trained to help ourselves. And so survival became a big part of law enforcement training. And part of that goes back to even the whole concept of what I want to talk about with you after this is that we've moved into a survival over service mentality. And so over time, that's kind of generated the whole warrior mindset and the whole warrior identity. But I digress for a second. So it's important. So in 2007-ish, we realized there was a problem. I was actually the only surgeon I knew. There are several ER docs in that world that were kind of venturing into that space. But because of my background in public safety, and my history in law enforcement and EMS, I realized that this was something that we should be talking about. So I actually wrote a course called Medical Tactics for Law Enforcement. I talked to you about this before. You've been part of it. And this was 2010, 2009. We published a book called Officer Down, a practical tactical guide to surviving an injury in the street. And and then I got on the road and I created a cadre of instructors. And over the 6 years that we were really going hard with this course, we taught 7,800 federal, state, and local law enforcement officers and agents around the country. And we taught them what we called medical tactics for law enforcement, which is a concept of not only understanding the physical injury, the physics of the injury and the physicality of the injury, but recognizing that your mindset plays a whole lot into how and if you're going to survive. So we married that course. The beauty of that course was to marry the mindset, give you a true frame of reference, give you perspective, and then give you the countermeasures upon which to act on. And then we also provided you with some of the critical tools to walk away with. And so we married the whole thing into one course where you got the psychological prep, the physical prep, and then you walked away with the tools to apply them. And it was a 2-day course, and it was extremely successful.
It was extraordinary as well. I mean, it was life changing. I know for a lot of my friends and my officers. Um, and as you were, as you got this reputation for being this not only a skilled physician, but a cop and a police trainer, you caught the attention of the entertainment industry. We got to mention that as well. Talk about that.
Yeah. So I was the associate producer, executive medical advisor for the Dick Wolf shows in Chicago, the Chicago One shows, starting with PD as a consultant, then fire as a consultant. And then I was the associate producer and I wrote and produced all the medicine on Chicago Med up until this year. So 10 seasons of Chicago Med and two seasons of the other shows prior to that. And then that spun off into a bunch of other Hollywood shows that I've worked on, Empire, Force, Redline, etc. So yes, in a million years, I'm a trauma surgeon. I work at the county hospital in Chicago. I grew up on the Jersey Shore and went to medical school in Kansas City. In a million years, I never would have thought I would have ended up on red carpets, but that's been a whole lot of fun as well.
Did you ever get to appear on any of those shows?
I did. I appeared several times. Not, I try to avoid the camera, honestly, most of the time. A lot of times where you see very technical things where we're using hands, I had to shave my arms a couple times to match the actors. But you saw my hands in the scene. My wife also, we did this as a pair. My wife is an obstetrician, and she did all the OB and all the women, the maternal fetal medicine that went onto the shows, and we did a lot of baby deliveries on Chicago Med. So she was on there. She actually acted as a plastic surgeon once. And then my last season, I performed in a vintage part of the, we filmed a vintage piece that was supposed to take place in the 1940s, and we shot it like it was in the 40s, and I was doing lobotomies through people's eyes. It was disgusting.
So
And
here
for a
you
trauma
are.
surgeon, that says a lot,
Oh
just to
my
say.
gosh. Because they used to do that. It's insane. So here you are. You've done so many things. You could kind of be coasting, but you have a new concept that you want to bring to public safety, and I think it's so extraordinary that I want people to know about it, and I want you to explain it because we're in an atmosphere now where there's a lot of separation sometimes between law enforcement officers and our community. We've really gotten beat up the last 10 years, especially the last 4 years. And you have a great concept that I think could not only save lives, but could help save this profession. Let's talk about that.
So I came to a point in my career, I'm 24 years in at the county as a trauma surgeon, the same number of years as a law enforcement officer in Illinois. And I've started reflecting back, asking myself, all right, what have I learned and what can I teach? Now, I've had the opportunity and the privilege to work alongside some remarkable people. I would call them heroes. Many would call them heroes, whether they're doctors, nurses, cops, paramedics, firefighters, it doesn't matter. They all qualify in my world as that, and in many others. What I've realized, though, over the last several years, and we've all lived this, is that we have seen a shift in our environment. We've seen a shift where there's a rift between society and law enforcement. We have a mental health crisis in law enforcement. I mean, just over the last 2 years, over 12 Chicago police officers have taken their own lives. And this is not just the fire department or police department, it's the fire department as well, and it's public safety around the country. So we have a crisis in mental health. We all know about that. That's made some headlines, at least in the world. I don't think it's drawn enough attention, but it's certainly a problem. The other thing is that we've lived through a very dynamic time where the world has changed in front of us. The Norman Rockwell picture of the police officer with the little child pulling at him, that doesn't exist anymore. And I've asked myself why. So I'm a surgical scientist. I'm a researcher. I ask questions. I research. I look for ways to study things, and I try to publish on them. And if they have legs, then I try to bring it to the next level. So what got me thinking was, okay, what are the problems? Problem one is that we have a perception problem in law enforcement. The public does not perceive, and remember, perceive is how you identify with something, how you interpret it. The public does not perceive law enforcement to be friendly. They see them as enforcers. And when you break it down and you're a police officer, you have to ask yourself what tools you have. Also, when you put that in the context of the numbers and types of calls for service, most people call 911 because they have a problem that they cannot solve themselves. And so they're calling for help. A good portion of service calls are medical, mental health emergencies, and then there's crime. So there's really three types of service calls for simplicity's sake. Well, if you're a cop and you get to a service call and it's not a crime, and there's no one to be detained, there's no one to fight with, there's no one to stop the crime from happening, take a report, do the forensics, whatever, then it's either a medical emergency or a psychological emergency. And we've learned through the last several years, that psychological emergencies demand our attention, and it demands that we be trained to deal with them. Because in the years where I was researching tasers and we were, tasers first statement was tase often, tase early. And that was when law officers were showing up to mental health emergencies. And so it automatically became a violent encounter when it may have had to be that way, but often there may have been other pathways. I'm not saying there always were, but we never explored those pathways. We never trained for those pathways. So we're now identifying that as an issue. We now see that, and we're not only do we see, we're being mandated to provide training for the officers and provide tools to bring to the environment and into society with us, whether they're co-responders or other means. And every agency is tackling this a little differently to address mental health. But the other part that we respond to are medical emergencies. And when you think about it, it's the law enforcement officers that are out in the wild all the time. Firefighters, they're cozy in their lounge chairs, in their stations,
The
playing
video games.
their video games, you name it. And they're awesome. They're remarkable guys and women, but they're not the ones that are typically the first on the scene. It's the law enforcement officers that are first on the scene. If you're the police officer and you're the first one there and you address the scene and the scene is safe at that moment and your team comes in and you're able to create a perimeter and deal with it and someone's dying on the street, if you are not equipped or empowered to treat that person, you will stand there and wait till the EMS gets there. And that is a gap in time that can be quite substantial depending on where you are. One of the biggest complaints, and this threw me actually, I just learned this last year. One of my social workers told me this, and he said that one of the biggest complaints that he gets from our patients is that they were injured, EMS was responding, but not there yet, but the police were there, and the officers were just asking them questions with their hands in their pockets, waiting for EMS to get there. And in their mind, they were dying, and the cops were just staying there watching them die. Now, again, that needs to be put into perspective, but that is a true perception of a lot of people. And I work at an inner city, I work at the county hospital, but nonetheless, that is a statement that is heard over and over again. So we have a bridge, we have a time gap that needs to be addressed. Why are we not trained and equipped to do so? Because if you can't help somebody, that actually can contribute to a mental health crisis of your own. It's learned helplessness. It is a feeling of not being able to help somebody and watch them struggle or even die. And that leaves a lasting mark. That is extremely impactful. And those are the memories that keep people waking up with over and over and over again. That's post-traumatic stress injury. And that can be prevented as well, because doing something or feeling like you're doing something can be at the very least, be a very powerful tool. So by training and equipping law enforcement officers to bridge that gap and to train them and equip them to provide rescue in addition to enforcement, that's where I'm leading with this. That's where I'm going. I think that we've relegated the hero card to the firefighters for a long time, but it's the cops that are there first. And so why should they not get the credit? We do so many heroic acts. We save so many lives on a regular basis, and we don't talk about it. We don't get credit for it, but the credit goes to the firefighters and the paramedics. And that's good, but that also belittles a lot of effort on the law enforcement side. So if you were to add rescue to Leo, you get LERO, right? So, hero and LERO. That's really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about creating a program, or at least a discussion. Let's go back a little bit. A discussion about training police officers to bridge the gap and even go further than that if they choose to, or the agency chooses to, and become EMS providers. So an integrated EMS approach to law enforcement. Because if we're only seen as the enforcers and we're not seen as the rescuers, the the gap between society and law enforcement will only widen.
So how much extra training do what are you looking at? Like EMT or paramedic, or what's your vision of this for your average cop?
Well, I'll go farther than that. What I am talking about exists. There are pilot programs, there are well established programs all over the country where EMS is owned by law enforcement, not the fire service. Remember, the fire department took on EMS not because they wanted to. EMS is the bastard stepchild of most fire departments. The fire department merged with EMS because there weren't enough fire calls to support being firefighters alone anymore. In Chicago, and I can speak from Chicago because I live in this environment, I work in this environment, every engine in the city of Chicago is an ALS paramedic equipped engine. Every truck is a BLS EMT equipped truck. They often beat the ambulances there. You only have 80 something ambulances, and you have far more trucks and engines around the city than you do ambulances. So you police get there first, then the fire department, and then EMS gets there.
How do you marry up officer safety with being that true first responder that is trying to save a life? In other words, if we get somewhere and we're still not sure if somebody's going to try and take our life, how do we also respond to save a life?
Well, the concept I'm talking about does not stand alone. You're still the police. Your job is to make it safe. Your job is to eliminate the threat. None of that changes. I'm not advocating for anything but that. But once the threat is neutralized, once there are people to be taken care of, and they can be friend, they could be society, they could be colleague, it could be anything, or yourself, then to not have equipment or training, I think we're doing society a disservice. I think we're doing our profession a disservice. And I think that it's not something that's hard to overcome. And I'll give you a couple examples. The proofs of concept that exist out there. The Illinois State Police is the best example, not only because I work for the state police and because I'm the medical director, and I am, but I'm also proud of this agency because since before I got there, every state trooper is an EMR, emergency medical responder, which is basically an EMT equivalent without the ambulance side of it. Every trooper, every squad car that every trooper drives, because they get their cars to take home, is a basic life support, non-transport EMS vehicle, in addition to being a squad car. So every trooper is an EMS professional in addition to a law enforcement professional. They're a LERO, right? They are, they go out every day and they respond to crashes. They're on the highways. A good portion of the troopers are on the highways. And people are pretty happy to see a trooper roll up. We do, as a state police, over 400 medical rescues every year that we barely talk about.
And that's one of the things when you look at like a state police organization like Illinois. When people think about Illinois, they think about Chicago, where you're at. But most of the state of Illinois, and it's a big state, it is rural. And as an Illinois state trooper, you're very often a half an hour or more from an ambulance, even getting to the crash scene that you're at, or the heart attack, or whatever it is. So this does seem like a no-brainer, especially in rural and smaller suburban areas, doesn't it?
Sure. And so the Illinois State Police is an EMS agency. It's actually an Illinois Department of Public Health accredited, licensed, non-transport, basic life support with advanced life support skill sets agency in the state of Illinois. So we meet every standard that's required of an EMS agency. We're actually the second largest EMS agency behind the city of Chicago in numbers. Think about that. We're cops. In COVID, we ran the largest mass vaccination sites in the nation as the state police. We know what we can do. It's a great agency in that respect. And yes, every one of those troopers in central and southern Illinois brings that squad car home, brings that tool set and that skill set often to baseball games, to the community. It's a means of community engagement. there's a lot of benefit to this
It's kind of
besides.
it's kind of the ultimate in community policing, if you will.
Yes. But Illinois State Police is not the only one. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department has had an integrated EMS program for decades. Television shows, 240 Robert was written about it. So they've been out there. The New York City Police Department, ESU, runs an EMS program. The Where I came from, and what got me thinking about this early was actually I grew up in Monmouth County, New Jersey. Sean Golden is the sheriff in Monmouth County. Most of the EMS in Monmouth County is run by volunteers. And over the last several years, volunteers have been very hard to come by. And so the ambulance calls go out and no one's showing up. So the police department started stepping up because they were out on the streets and they started equipping squad cars as EMTs. And the Monmouth County Sheriff's Office just stood up 7 basic life support ambulances marked up as sheriff's vehicles. And they are transporting in lieu of the basic life support squads because they're solving a problem. So it's see a need, fill a need. And every region and area will have different needs. You can't universally apply one model to this. There are lots of ways to skin this cat. But the upside, when you really dissect it, is huge. Now, one caveat. This upside does not, it may bridge gaps with society. It may offer areas for community engagement. It may soften the uniform if the cops are out there teaching CPR like we do as the state police. It may improve officer wellness. It may increase recruitment. All of that are upsides for the law enforcement side. But what it also does is create common ground for the society that wants to defund the police, because this allows us a common space to have an open discussion and help each other. And so that's where that's all the upside. Now, it doesn't solve poverty. It doesn't solve biases. It doesn't solve socioeconomic issues. None of that will be solved. But what it does do is create a pathway for common ground, to open dialogue, to build relationships. And that's where the future has to go. We've got to embrace more than enforcement. Otherwise, we will be relegated to just being enforcers, and we will be relegated to be not liked, not welcomed, yet we could be.
Absolutely. I wish we had about another hour to talk. We've got about a minute. If a political leader or a citizen or a police leader is listening to this and they want to get in touch with you and have a discussion about this, how can they reach out to you?
The best way is just to hit me up through my email, which is adennis, ADENNIS, @medicaltactics.com, or through my county email, adennis@cookcountytrauma.org. Or
Doc, I can't thank you enough for everything that you've done for my profession, for my home, and what you continue to do for the citizens of Illinois and beyond. And we really thank you for spending time with us today. And if you would like more information about the National Police Association, you can visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Every day, the brave men and women of law enforcement put their lives on the line to keep us safe. But they need our help to continue their mission. Activist politicians, progressive prosecutors, the ACLU, and the rest of the anti-police forces receive millions in donations from extremist pro-criminal elements like George Soros and woke corporations. The National Police Association is fighting them in courts around the country, including the United States Supreme Court, defending officers who are being attacked for doing their jobs. Additionally, the National Police Association works year-round to pass tough-on-crime legislation to put and keep criminals behind bars. Consider going to nationalpolice.org and donating to keep us in the fight. Together we can win. That is nationalpolice.org.